A 6-7-year-old woman walked into a cosmetic surgery clinic on what should have been just another Tuesday morning. She was nervous, yes, but also hopeful. Hopeful about looking younger, feeling better about herself, maybe finding love again in the autumn years of her life. But she never walked out of that clinic. She died on the operating table. And what the world initially dismissed as a tragic medical accident was actually something far more darker, something that would make your blood run cold. Because investigators soon discovered it wasn't an accident at all. It was murder. Calculated, premeditated, cold-blooded murder. And the people responsible? They were the ones who claimed to love her most. This is the story of how greed, manipulation, and betrayal came together in the most twisted conspiracy you could imagine. A conspiracy that involved not just strangers, but family. Not just opportunists, but those who shared her DNA. This is a case where love was weaponized, where trust became a death sentence, and where the people who should have protected her became her executioners. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear contains twists that will shock you, revelations that will disturb you, and a level of evil that will make you question everything you thought you knew about human nature. Intro to Channel 1-1-30. Welcome to Real Crime Stories HQ, where we dive deep into the darkest corners of human behavior. I'm your host, and if this is your first time here, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. Seriously, do it. We bring you the most shocking, most disturbing, and most compelling true crime stories every single week. And trust me when I tell you, you're going to want to be here for what's coming. Hit that like button if you're ready to dive into this nightmare. Drop a comment and let me know what you think as we go through this absolutely devastating case. Because this one is going to stay with you long after this video ends. Let me take you back. Way back. Back to a time when our victim, let's call her Margaret, was just a young girl growing up in a small Midwestern town in the 1960 seconds. Margaret was born into a working-class family. Her father worked at the local factory, putting in 12-hour shifts 6 days a week. Her mother was a seamstress, taking in work from neighbors to help make ends meet. They didn't have much, but they had each other. And Margaret, she was a dreamer. From the time she was a little girl, Margaret loved to read. She would spend hours at the local library, losing herself in stories of adventure and romance. Her teachers said she was bright, curious, always asking questions. She wanted more than what her small town could offer. She dreamed of going to college, of becoming a teacher herself, of traveling the world. She had this beautiful spirit, this light in her eyes that everyone noticed. But life had other plans for Margaret. When she was just 17 years old, her father died in an industrial accident at the factory. Just like that, the family's main source of income was gone. Her mother fell into a deep depression, unable to work, unable to function. And Margaret? She had to grow up overnight. She had to become the provider. She had to put her dreams on hold. She took a job as a secretary at a local insurance office. It wasn't what she wanted, but it paid the bills. She worked there for 2 years, sending every penny home to help her mother. And then, when she was 19, she met Robert. Robert was 10 years older than her, a salesman who came through town on business. He was charming, confident, well-dressed. He told her she was beautiful. He told her she deserved better than this small town. He told her he would take care of her. Margaret fell hard. She fell fast. And within 3 months, they were married. She thought this was her escape. She thought this was her chance at happiness. She thought Robert was her knight in shining armor. But she was so wrong. The first year of marriage was okay. Robert provided for her. They moved to a bigger city. Margaret finally left that small town behind. But slowly, things began to change. Robert started drinking. He became jealous, possessive, controlling. He didn't like her working. He didn't like her having friends. He wanted her home, isolated, dependent on him and him alone. And then came the first time he hit her. She was 22 years old, pregnant with their first child, and he backhanded her across the face during an argument about money. She was shocked, terrified, but he apologized. He cried. He promised it would never happen again. And like so many women in her situation, she believed him. She wanted to believe him, because what was her alternative? Go back to that small town, back to her depressed mother? She felt trapped. The abuse continued throughout her pregnancy. And when she gave birth to her daughter, let's call her Jennifer, Margaret hoped things would change. She hoped becoming a father would soften Robert, but it only made things worse. The stress of a new baby, the financial pressure, It all gave Robert more reasons to lash out, more excuses to drink, more justifications for his violence. Margaret endured 15 years of this hell. 15 years of walking on eggshells. 15 years of covering bruises with makeup. 15 years of lying to neighbors and family about how she got that black eye or that broken wrist. She stayed because she was scared. She stayed because she had no money of her own. She stayed because Robert told her no one else would ever want her. She stayed because she thought it was what she had to do for Jennifer. But here's the thing about trauma. Here's the thing about abuse. It doesn't just hurt the direct victim. It spreads like poison through the entire family. Jennifer grew up in a house filled with violence and fear. She grew up watching her mother be degraded and beaten. She grew up learning that this was what relationships looked like, that this was what love looked like. And it damaged her in ways that wouldn't become clear until much later. By the time Jennifer was 15, the house was a war zone. Robert's drinking had gotten worse. The violence had escalated, and Margaret had finally reached her breaking point. One night, after Robert came home drunk and tried to strangle her, Margaret did something she never thought she'd have the courage to do. She called the police. Robert was arrested. A restraining order was issued, and for the first time in 15 years, Margaret was free. But the damage had been done. The trauma was deep. And Jennifer was angry. Not at her father, which you might expect, but at her mother. She blamed Margaret for the chaos in their lives. She blamed her for not being strong enough, for not leaving sooner, for staying so long. Teenagers process trauma in complicated ways, and Jennifer's resentment toward her mother would fester for decades. Margaret tried to rebuild. She got a job as a receptionist at a dental office. She saved every penny. She worked overtime whenever she could. She was determined to create a better life for herself and Jennifer. But Jennifer had already checked out emotionally. She became rebellious, distant, cold toward her mother. She moved out the day she turned 18, and their relationship became strained, filled with tension and unresolved pain. Margaret tried to bridge that gap. She really did. She reached out constantly. She sent cards, gifts, money when Jennifer needed it, but Jennifer kept her at arm's length. She had built walls around her heart, and Margaret couldn't break through them. It was devastating for Margaret. After everything she had survived, after everything she had sacrificed, her own daughter wanted nothing to do with her. And the isolation Margaret felt during those years after Jennifer left, it was crushing. She had no family nearby. Her mother had passed away. She had lost touch with old friends. She threw herself into work, but work couldn't fill the void. She was lonely, desperately, painfully lonely. She would go home to her small apartment every night and sit in silence, wondering where it all went wrong, wondering why her life had turned out this way. But Margaret was nothing if not resilient. She had survived an abusive marriage. She had rebuilt her life from nothing, and she wasn't going to give up now. In her 40s, something shifted for Margaret. She decided she wasn't going to be a victim anymore. She wasn't going to let her past define her future. She enrolled in night classes at a community college. Remember those dreams she had as a young girl? About becoming a teacher? She was finally going to make them happen. It took her 6 years of night classes while working full-time, but she did it. She earned her degree in education, and at the age of 51, Margaret became a kindergarten teacher. Can you imagine? After everything she had been through, after all the pain and trauma and loss, she achieved her childhood dream. And she was good at it. She was really, really good at it. The children loved her. Parents requested her specifically. She had this warmth, this patience, this genuine love for teaching that made her exceptional. She poured all the love she couldn't give to Jennifer into those children. She showed up every single day with a smile on her face, determined to make a difference in their lives. But it wasn't just teaching that transformed Margaret's life. She also started investing. She was careful with money, having learned the hard way during her marriage how important financial independence was. She lived modestly, saved aggressively, and made smart investments in the stock market. Over the years, her portfolio grew. By the time she was in her 60s, Margaret had accumulated over $400,000 in savings and investments. She owned her home outright. She had a pension from the school district. She was, for the first time in her life, financially secure. She traveled. She went to Europe, something she had dreamed about since childhood. She visited museums, tried new foods, made friends with other travelers. She took up painting. She volunteered at a local animal shelter. She built a life that was rich and meaningful, and entirely her own. She was proof that it's never too late to start over. That you can survive the worst things imaginable and still build something beautiful. Her colleagues at the school adored her. They would go out for happy hour on Fridays. They celebrated birthdays together. Margaret had finally found the community she had been missing for so long. She was happy, genuinely, truly happy. For the first time in decades, she felt like herself. Like the person she was always meant to be before life and abuse and trauma tried to break her. She retired at 65, with a comfortable pension and her substantial savings. She bought a nice condo in a retirement community. She joined a book club. She took cooking classes. She was living her best life, and everyone who knew her during this time will tell you the same thing. She was radiant. She was kind. She was content. But there was still one piece missing from Margaret's life. One hole that all the success and independence and happiness couldn't quite fill. Despite everything Margaret had accomplished, despite the life she had built, there were nights when she felt profoundly alone. She would sit in her beautiful condo, surrounded by books and paintings and memories of her travels, and feel the weight of solitude pressing down on her. She missed companionship, not just friendship, but romantic companionship, someone to share meals with, someone to watch movies with on Sunday afternoons, someone to hold her hand during walks in the park. She was 65 years old, and she hadn't been in a romantic relationship since her divorce from Robert over 30 years ago. She had tried dating in her 50s, but it never went anywhere. Men her age seemed to want younger women, and Margaret, having been so badly burned by Robert, was cautious, maybe too cautious. She had walls up, protective barriers she didn't even realize were there. She was afraid of getting hurt again, afraid of falling into another abusive relationship, afraid of losing the independence she had fought so hard to build. But as she entered her 60s, those walls started to feel less like protection and more like a prison. She would see couples at restaurants, walking hand in hand in the park, traveling together, and feel a pang of longing so sharp it almost took her breath away. She wanted that. She deserved that. After everything she had been through, didn't she deserve to experience real love? Healthy love? The kind of love that lifts you up instead of tearing you down? Her friends encouraged her to try online dating. Everyone does it these days, they said. You might meet someone wonderful. Margaret was hesitant at first. The whole thing seemed strange to her. But eventually, she gave in. She created a profile on a dating website for seniors. She uploaded a photo. She wrote a bio describing her love of books and travel and teaching. And she waited. The responses were slow at first. A few messages from men who seemed nice enough but didn't spark any real interest. She went on a couple of coffee dates that went nowhere. She was starting to think maybe this whole online dating thing wasn't for her. Maybe she was just meant to be alone. But then, one day, she received a message that changed everything. A message that seemed like fate. A message from a man who seemed perfect, too perfect. Because he wasn't perfect at all. He was a predator, a manipulator, a monster in disguise. And his name was David. David's message was different from the others. It wasn't generic. It wasn't sleazy. It was thoughtful, personal, charming. He had read her profile carefully. He commented on her love of European travel, mentioning specific museums she had listed. He quoted one of her favorite authors. He asked genuine questions about her teaching career. He seemed interested in her as a person, not just as a lonely older woman to take advantage of. Margaret was intrigued. She looked at his profile. David claimed to be 54 years old, 11 years younger than her. He was handsome in his photos. Salt and pepper hair, warm smile, kind eyes. Or at least, that's what they looked like in pictures. He said he was a retired contractor, that he loved hiking, cooking, and classic films. That he was looking for a genuine connection with someone who valued intelligence and kindness over superficial things. It all seemed too good to be true, and you know what they say about things that seem too good to be true? They usually are. They started messaging back and forth. At first, just a few messages a day, then more frequently. Within a week, they were texting constantly. Good morning texts. Good night texts. Messages throughout the day sharing thoughts and jokes and observations about life. David was attentive in a way Margaret had never experienced. He remembered small details she mentioned. He asked follow-up questions. He made her feel seen, heard, valued. After 2 weeks of messaging, David suggested they meet in person, coffee at a cafe near Margaret's condo. She was nervous but excited. She spent extra time on her makeup and outfit. She arrived a few minutes early, and when David walked in, she felt a flutter in her chest. He was even more handsome in person. Tall, confident, well-dressed. He greeted her with a warm hug and a genuine smile. The coffee date lasted 3 hours. They talked about everything. Their childhoods, their past relationships, their dreams and disappointments. And here's where David's manipulation really began. Because David had a story. A story specifically designed to make Margaret trust him, to make her feel like they were kindred spirits. David told her about his own abusive childhood. How his father was an alcoholic who beat him and his mother. How he watched his mother suffer the way Margaret had suffered. How he grew up, determined to never be like his father. To treat women with respect and kindness. He told her he understood trauma. He understood survival. He understood what it meant to rebuild your life from ashes. Margaret was moved. She felt this instant connection, this deep understanding between them. She thought she had finally found someone who got it, someone who understood her pain without her having to explain it, someone who would never hurt her the way Robert had. But it was all a lie. Every word of it, carefully crafted, perfectly delivered, designed to lower her defenses and make her vulnerable. They started dating. David was the perfect boyfriend. He brought her flowers. He cooked dinner for her. He took her to art galleries and independent film screenings. He held her hand. He kissed her softly. He told her she was beautiful, intelligent, remarkable. He said he couldn't believe his luck in finding her. And Margaret? She fell completely, utterly, hopelessly in love. After 30 years of being alone, after decades of believing she would never experience real love, here it was. Here he was. David. Her second chance at happiness. But there were things about David that Margaret didn't know. Things he carefully kept hidden. Things that, if she had known, would have sent her running in the opposite direction. David wasn't 54. He was 47. He had lied about his age to seem more appropriate for her. He wasn't a retired contractor. He was unemployed, living off unemployment benefits and whatever money he could scam from others. His claims about an abusive childhood? Completely fabricated. His father was a respected businessman who had cut David off years ago after discovering his son's pattern of manipulation and theft. David was a con artist, a professional liar, a parasite who had been targeting vulnerable older women for years. He had a criminal record for fraud and identity theft. He had left a trail of broken hearts and empty bank accounts across 3 states. And now, he had set his sights on Margaret. Within 3 months, David suggested they move in together. "Why are we wasting money on 2 places?" he asked. "We're together all the time anyway. Let's make it official." Margaret hesitated. It seemed fast. But David was persuasive. He made it seem romantic, practical, inevitable. And Margaret, so deeply in love, so afraid of being alone again, agreed. David moved into Margaret's condo. And that's when things started to change. At first, the changes were subtle. David started making comments about Margaret's appearance. "Are you sure you want to wear that? It's a bit frumpy. Have you thought about doing something different with your hair? You know, you'd look so much younger if you considered a little cosmetic work." The comments were always framed as concern, as trying to help her look her best, but they chipped away at her self-esteem bit by bit. He started controlling her finances. "Let me help you manage your investments," he said. "I have experience with this stuff." Margaret, wanting to trust him, gave him access to her accounts, and David started moving money around. Small amounts at first, then larger sums. He claimed it was for better investment opportunities, but really, he was positioning himself to drain her dry. He isolated her from her friends. When Margaret's book club friends called, David would make plans for that night. When she wanted to have dinner with colleagues, he'd have a reason why they should stay home instead. "Don't you want to spend time with me?" he'd ask, making her feel guilty for having a life outside of him. Slowly, Margaret's social circle shrank. Her friends stopped calling as much. She stopped making plans. Her world became smaller and smaller, with David at the center of it. He was using classic abuser tactics, love bombing followed by gradual isolation, building dependency, eroding her confidence, making her doubt herself, making her feel like she needed him, like she was lucky to have him, like no one else would want her. But Margaret couldn't see it, or maybe she didn't want to see it, because admitting she had fallen for another manipulator after Robert, that would be too painful. That would mean she hadn't learned anything. That would mean she was still that scared, trapped woman she thought she had escaped. David also started planting seeds about cosmetic surgery. He'd show her before and after photos of women who'd had facelifts. He'd mention how young they looked afterward. He'd casually suggest that Margaret could benefit from a little work. At first, Margaret dismissed it. She was comfortable with her age. She had earned every line on her face through a life fully lived. But David was persistent and insidious. He made her feel like she was losing him, like he might leave her if she didn't maintain her appearance. He'd mention seeing an attractive younger woman at the grocery store. He'd bring up his ex-girlfriend who took care of herself. He'd withhold affection when Margaret didn't look put together. The psychological warfare was brutal and effective. Within a year of living with David, Margaret was a shadow of the confident woman she had been. She second-guessed everything. She felt insecure about her appearance. She felt dependent on David's approval. She felt grateful that he stayed with her despite her flaws. This is what abuse looks like. It's not always bruises and broken bones. Sometimes it's 1,000 small cuts, 1,000 tiny moments of degradation, a systematic destruction of self-worth. And then David did something that would set the final stage for murder. He introduced Margaret to her daughter, Jennifer. Remember Jennifer, Margaret's daughter, who had been distant for decades? David reached out to her. He called her up and said he was Margaret's boyfriend, and that her mother missed her terribly. He suggested they have dinner together, a chance to reconnect, to heal old wounds. Jennifer was skeptical. She and Margaret had barely spoken in years. Their relationship was cold, strained, defined by resentment and unresolved trauma. But David was persuasive. He painted himself as a peacemaker, someone who just wanted to see this mother and daughter relationship repaired. So Jennifer agreed to dinner, and when they all met at a restaurant, something shifted. David was charming to Jennifer, flattering, attentive. He made her feel seen and valued in a way her own mother never had. He asked about her life, her struggles, her dreams. He sympathized with her childhood trauma. He validated her feelings about Margaret. And here's the sick, twisted thing. David started grooming Jennifer too, not romantically at first. Just building trust, building rapport, making her feel like he understood her, like he was on her side. Jennifer's life hadn't turned out great. She was in her late 40s now, divorced twice, struggling financially, working dead-end jobs. She had her own substance abuse issues, her own mental health struggles. She was bitter, angry at the world, angry at her mother for the childhood she had. And David saw that bitterness, that anger, that vulnerability, and he knew exactly how to exploit it. Over the following months, David stayed in contact with Jennifer separately from Margaret. They'd meet for coffee, they'd text, and David started planting ideas in Jennifer's head. Ideas about how much money Margaret had. Ideas about how Margaret was getting older and would leave everything to Jennifer eventually anyway. Ideas about how maybe Jennifer deserved some of that money now, after the childhood she endured. David was positioning Jennifer as an accomplice. He was turning her against her mother in new, more dangerous ways. He was making her complicit in what would come next. And then came the affair. Yes, you heard that right. David started a sexual relationship with Jennifer, behind Margaret's back, with her own daughter. It's so sick, so twisted, so beyond comprehension that it's hard to even process. But this is the level of evil we're dealing with here. This is the depth of David's depravity. Jennifer, starving for attention and validation, fell for it. She knew it was wrong. She knew it was a betrayal of her mother, but she did it anyway. Maybe out of decades of unresolved resentment. Maybe because David made her feel special. Maybe because she was just as broken and damaged as David was manipulative and evil. The affair went on for months. Secret meetings while Margaret was at her book club or running errands. Hotel rooms, parking lots, cheap motels on the edge of town. And during these encounters, David and Jennifer started planning something unspeakable. Something that would destroy Margaret's life. Literally. They started planning her murder. Let that sink in for a moment. A mother's boyfriend and her own daughter, in a secret affair, planning her murder. The woman who gave Jennifer life. The woman David claimed to love. They were going to kill her. For her money. For her assets. For her life insurance. They were going to end her life so they could benefit from her death. The affair had started as just physical attraction. David was good-looking, manipulative, knew exactly what to say. Jennifer was lonely, damaged, desperate for connection. But it quickly became something darker, something transactional. David started talking about Margaret's finances, about how much money she had, about her life insurance policy, about how it was such a waste for all that money to just sit there when they could be using it. And Jennifer listened. She didn't push back. She didn't defend her mother. Instead, she started contributing ideas. What if Margaret had an accident? What if she got sick? What if something happened during a medical procedure? They talked about these possibilities like they were discussing dinner plans, casual, cold, calculated. David told Jennifer he loved her, that they could be together once Margaret was gone, that they could travel the world on Margaret's money, that they could finally be happy. And Jennifer, despite every red flag, despite every warning sign in her brain, believed him. Or maybe she just wanted to believe him. Maybe the promise of money and escape was too tempting to resist. They started researching methods, how to kill someone and make it look like an accident. They looked into poisoning, staging falls, car accidents. But all of these methods had risks, too many variables, too many ways they could get caught. And then David had an idea, a terrible, evil, perfect idea: cosmetic surgery. He had been pushing Margaret toward it for months anyway, and cosmetic surgery had risks, real risks. People died during cosmetic procedures. Not often, but it happened. And if it happened to Margaret, well, that would just be a tragic accident. No one would suspect murder. No one would investigate too deeply. They would collect the insurance money and walk away free. Jennifer thought it was genius. Horrible, but genius. They started planning in earnest. But they needed help. They needed a doctor willing to participate. A doctor who could deliberately cause Margaret's death during surgery and make it look like a complication. A doctor who could be bought. And that's when they found Dr. Martin. Dr. Martin was a cosmetic surgeon with a troubled past. He had lost his medical license in another state due to malpractice and substance abuse issues. He had been practicing in a strip mall clinic, doing cheap procedures for cash under the table. He was desperate for money, desperate enough to do something unthinkable. David found him through connections in the criminal underworld, through people who knew a doctor who wasn't too concerned about ethics or the law. David reached out. They met at a bar, and David laid out the proposition. "I need a surgical complication," David said. "I need someone to die on the operating table. And I need it to look completely natural, an accident, a tragic but understandable outcome of surgery." He slid an envelope across the table. $50,000 in cash, half up front, half after the job was done. Dr. Martin should have said no. He should have walked away. He should have gone to the police. But he didn't. He looked at that envelope. He thought about his debts, his addiction, his desperation, and he said yes. They planned every detail. Margaret would come in for a facelift. Dr. Martin would use anesthesia improperly. Too much, too fast. Or maybe he'd nick an artery and let her bleed out internally. Or maybe he'd induce a blood clot. There were options, ways to kill someone during surgery that could be explained away as complications. But first, they had to get Margaret to agree to the surgery. David ramped up his campaign. He became relentless about Margaret's appearance. He'd comment on every line, every wrinkle, every sign of aging. He'd compare her to younger women constantly. He'd withhold affection until she felt ugly, unwanted, desperate to please him. And then he'd lovingly suggest, "You know, sweetheart, there are options. Cosmetic surgery has come so far. You could look 10 years younger. You could feel confident again. I just want you to be happy." Margaret resisted at first. She didn't want surgery. It seemed vain, unnecessary, risky. But David wore her down, week after week, month after month, until she started to believe maybe he was right. Maybe she did need this. Maybe this would make him love her more. Maybe this would make her feel better about herself. Jennifer played her part too. She suddenly became more present in Margaret's life. She'd visit, she'd call. And she'd casually mention how good Margaret could look with a little work. How she deserved to treat herself. How it wasn't a big deal. Just a little procedure. Women did it all the time. The manipulation was coordinated. David and Jennifer tag-teaming Margaret's psyche until her defenses crumbled. Until she finally said yes. Yes, she would do the surgery. Yes, she would have the facelift. Yes, she would put her life in the hands of Dr. Martin. David made the appointment. He chose Dr. Martin's clinic specifically. He told Margaret it was affordable, that the doctor had great reviews online. Margaret didn't know those reviews were fake, didn't know Dr. Martin's history, didn't know she was walking into a trap. They set the date, 3 weeks away. During those 3 weeks, David and Jennifer finalized their plans. They made sure Margaret's life insurance beneficiaries were updated to include David. They had Margaret sign documents giving David power of attorney. They positioned themselves to inherit everything. Margaret, trusting and manipulated, signed everything David put in front of her. She thought they were building a life together. She thought this was love. She thought she was finally going to be happy. She had no idea she had just signed her own death warrant. The night before the surgery, Margaret couldn't sleep. She had this feeling, this gnawing sense of unease. She almost canceled. She thought about calling David and telling him she changed her mind, but she didn't, because she was afraid of disappointing him, afraid of seeming weak, afraid of losing his love. And that fear would cost her everything. The morning of the surgery, Margaret woke up at 5 a.m. She hadn't slept more than a couple of hours. Her stomach was in knots. David was sleeping next to her, peaceful, undisturbed. She looked at him and felt a wave of love. He was doing this for her. He wanted her to feel beautiful. She had to go through with it. For him. For them. For their future together. She got out of bed quietly and made coffee. Her hands were shaking as she poured it. The surgery was scheduled for 8 a.m. Pre-op appointments started at 7. David had insisted on driving her, being there with her, supporting her. What a devoted boyfriend, everyone would think. What a loving partner. They drove to the clinic in silence. Margaret stared out the window, watching the sun rise, feeling like she was driving toward something terrible. But she pushed those feelings down. She was being silly, dramatic. This was routine. People had cosmetic surgery every day and were fine. When they arrived at the clinic, it was in a run-down strip mall between a liquor store and a laundromat. Margaret felt her anxiety spike. This didn't look like the professional medical facility she had imagined, but David assured her it was fine. That appearances didn't matter. That Dr. Martin was excellent at what he did. They walked in. The waiting room smelled like antiseptic and something else. Something wrong. The receptionist barely looked up when they checked in. Margaret filled out paperwork with trembling hands. Medical history, emergency contacts, consent forms. So many consent forms. Acknowledgments of risks. Acknowledgments that she understood she could die. Die. The word jumped out at her from the page. She could die. People died during surgery. It was rare, but it happened. She looked at David. He smiled at her, squeezed her hand. "You're going to be fine," he said. "This is going to change your life." He had no idea how right he was. A nurse called her back. David kissed her forehead. "I'll be right here when you wake up," he promised. Margaret walked through the doors to the pre-op area, and David watched her go with dead eyes. No emotion, no concern, nothing. Because he knew she wasn't going to wake up. In the pre-op room, Margaret changed into a hospital gown. Another nurse took her vitals, asked about allergies, started an IV. Margaret's heart was racing. She told the nurse she was nervous. The nurse smiled reassuringly. "Everyone is nervous before surgery. Dr. Martin is very experienced. You're in good hands." If only she knew the truth. Dr. Martin came in to see her. He was younger than Margaret expected. Early 40s, tired eyes, shaky hands. He didn't inspire confidence, but he went through the procedure with her. Explained what he would do, how long it would take, what her recovery would be like. He was clinical, detached, professional enough to not raise alarm bells but not warm or reassuring. "Any questions?" he asked. Margaret had a million questions. But she shook her head. "No. I'm ready." "Good," Dr. Martin said, and for just a moment, she thought she saw something in his eyes. Guilt, regret, but then it was gone. They wheeled her into the operating room. Bright lights, cold air, machines beeping. The anesthesiologist appeared above her. "Okay, Margaret, I'm going to give you something to help you relax. Count backwards from 10 for me. 10, 9, 8, 7. And then nothing. Darkness. She was unconscious, helpless, at the mercy of people who had none. What happened next was murder, plain and simple. Dr. Martin, instead of performing the surgery properly, administered a lethal dose of anesthesia. He waited, watched her vitals drop, watched her oxygen levels plummet, watched her heart rate slow, and he did nothing to save her. The machines started alarming, beeping frantically. The nurses looked panicked. "Doctor, her vitals are dropping," one shouted. Dr. Martin made a show of attempting to intervene, but his efforts were deliberately inadequate. He knew exactly what he was doing. He had been paid to do this, paid to end a life. Within minutes, Margaret's heart stopped beating. They called it. Time of death, 8:47 a.m. A 6-7-year-old woman who had survived poverty, abuse, isolation, and rebuilt her entire life from nothing, was gone. Ended not by natural causes, not by accident, but by the calculated greed of people she trusted, people she loved. In the waiting room, David received the news. The nurse came out, her face appropriately somber. "Mr. Reynolds, I'm so sorry. There were complications during the procedure. We did everything we could, but Margaret didn't make it." David's reaction was textbook. He stood up suddenly, put his hand over his mouth, made a sound of anguish. No, that can't be. She was healthy. She was fine. What happened? His voice cracked at all the right moments. His eyes even produced tears. It was a performance worthy of an award. The nurse explained there had been an unexpected reaction to the anesthesia. That sometimes these things happen. That they had tried to revive her but couldn't. David nodded, asked the appropriate questions, signed the necessary paperwork. He even asked to see her body, because that's what a grieving partner would do. When he saw Margaret lying on the gurney, still and pale, he placed his hand on hers. He whispered, "I'm sorry, baby." And maybe, for just a fraction of a second, he felt something. Guilt? Remorse? But it passed quickly. He had a role to play. He called Jennifer from the parking lot. "It's done," he said simply. There was a pause on the other end. Then, Jennifer's voice, shaky but excited. "Really? It actually worked? She's gone. Now we wait a few weeks, play the grieving family, and then we collect." Jennifer should have felt horror at what they'd done. She should have felt overwhelming guilt. This was her mother, the woman who gave birth to her, who endured abuse to protect her, who worked herself to exhaustion to provide for her. But Jennifer didn't feel guilt. She felt relief. Relief that soon she'd have money, that her struggles would be over, that her life could finally begin. That's what greed does to people. It turns them into monsters. It makes them capable of the unthinkable. David arranged a quick cremation. He told people Margaret had wanted to be cremated, that she didn't want a big fuss. There was a small memorial service at a funeral home. Maybe 20 people attended. Margaret's colleagues from her teaching days. A few neighbors. Her book club friends. They shared stories about her kindness, her warmth, her resilience. They cried genuine tears for a woman they truly cared about. David and Jennifer were there, sitting in the front row, playing their parts. David gave a eulogy, talked about how much he loved Margaret, how she had changed his life, how he couldn't believe she was gone. Several people commented afterward on how devoted he seemed, how much he must have loved her. If only they knew the truth. After the service, after everyone had left, David and Jennifer met at a bar across town. They sat in a dark corner booth. David ordered whiskey. Jennifer ordered wine. They raised their glasses. "To Margaret," David said with a twisted smile. "May she rest in peace while we live our best lives." They clinked glasses. They drank, and they started planning their celebration. Before we continue, I want to pause here and ask you something. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching this from. What country? What city? Because this story, as horrifying as it is, could happen anywhere. Evil doesn't have borders. Greed doesn't discriminate. So let me know where you are. And let's build this community of people who want to understand the darkness so we can better recognize it when it appears in our own lives. Now, back to David and Jennifer, because what they did next is going to make your blood boil. 2 weeks after Margaret's death, David received the first insurance payout, $50,000 from her life insurance policy. More would come later, but this was the initial payment. And what did David do with this money? Money that came from murdering an innocent woman? He and Jennifer went on vacation. They booked a cruise, a luxury Caribbean cruise. 7 days of sun, alcohol, parties, and celebration. They left 3 weeks after Margaret's memorial service. Barely enough time for the appropriate grieving period. But David didn't care. Jennifer didn't care. They wanted to enjoy their blood money. They posted photos on social media. Pictures of them on the deck of the cruise ship, drinks in hand, smiling at the camera. Pictures of them at beach excursions. Pictures of them at fancy dinners. Jennifer even posted a photo with the caption, "Finally living my best life." Can you imagine? The woman helped murder her mother, and then bragged about living her best life on social media. During the cruise, they didn't hide their relationship. They held hands openly, kissed on the deck, danced together in the nightclub. They were acting like a couple celebrating an engagement or anniversary, not like people who should have been mourning a tragic loss. Other passengers noticed. How could they not? David and Jennifer were loud, obnoxious, drawing attention to themselves. They drank excessively. They laughed too much. They radiated this energy of people who had just won the lottery. Which, in their sick minds, they had. One passenger, an older woman named Patricia, struck up a conversation with Jennifer at the pool bar. "You seem so happy," Patricia said. "Special occasion?" Jennifer, drunk and careless, replied, "You could say that. My mom just passed, and she left me and my boyfriend a lot of money. We're celebrating her life." Patricia was taken aback. "I'm so sorry for your loss, but celebrating? So soon?" Jennifer realized she had said too much. She backtracked. "Oh, I mean, we're honoring her memory by living fully." That's what she would have wanted. But the damage was done. Patricia was uncomfortable. Something felt wrong about this whole situation. Back home, Margaret's friends were noticing things too. Margaret's colleague, Susan, saw the cruise photos on Jennifer's Facebook page. She was confused, disturbed. She called another friend, Linda. "Am I crazy, or is this really inappropriate?" she asked. Linda looked at the photos, saw Jennifer and David, clearly together romantically, clearly having the time of their lives, just weeks after Margaret's death. "That's Margaret's boyfriend," Linda said slowly, "and her daughter, together, on a cruise. This isn't right. Should we say something?" Susan asked. "To who? I mean, it's weird, but is it illegal?" They didn't know yet. They didn't know the full scope of the horror. But seeds of suspicion were being planted. The cruise ended. David and Jennifer returned home. They moved into Margaret's condo together. Didn't even wait a decent interval. Just moved right in. Started living openly as a couple. Spending Margaret's money. Driving her car. Sleeping in her bed. The neighbors were shocked. Mrs. Chen, who lived next door and had been friends with Margaret, confronted David one day in the hallway. "David, what's going on?" "That's Margaret's daughter. You two are together?" David smiled smoothly. "Margaret wanted us to take care of each other if anything happened to her. We're finding comfort in our shared grief." Mrs. Chen didn't buy it. "It's been 6 weeks, David. 6 weeks, and you've moved her daughter into Margaret's home?" "Margaret would want us to be happy," David said, his voice taking on an edge. "She'd want us to move forward with our lives. I don't think she'd appreciate you judging us." Mrs. Chen backed off, but she was unsettled. She started paying more attention, watching, noticing things, like the expensive new car that showed up in their parking spot, the shopping bags from luxury stores, the way David and Jennifer would come home late at night, laughing loudly, clearly drunk, clearly not mourning. Something was very, very wrong. 3 months after Margaret's death, David and Jennifer took another trip, this time to Las Vegas. They stayed at an expensive hotel, gambled with Margaret's money, attended shows, ate at the finest restaurants, and they were careless, so incredibly careless. They were at a nightclub on their second night, music pounding, lights flashing, alcohol flowing freely. Jennifer was dancing, arms in the air, wearing an expensive dress David had bought her with Margaret's life insurance money. David was next to her, hands on her waist, both of them lost in the moment. A stranger, a young woman named Ashley who was visiting Vegas for a bachelorette party, thought they looked like they were having such a great time. She took a photo, just a random candid shot of the crowd dancing. She posted it to Instagram with the caption, "Vegas vibes, everyone here is living their best life." It was just one photo among thousands posted from Las Vegas that night. Just one random moment captured and shared with the world. But that one photo would unravel everything. Because Margaret's friend Susan was scrolling through Instagram a few days later. She followed a travel hashtag, looking for vacation ideas. And there, in her feed, was Ashley's photo. And in the background, clear as day, were David and Jennifer, dancing, together, intimately, clearly a couple, clearly not grieving. Susan's stomach dropped. She screenshot the photo. She checked the date. It was posted just days ago. She looked at the location tag, Las Vegas. She did the math. Margaret had been dead for 3 months. 3 months, and her boyfriend and daughter were partying in Las Vegas together. Susan called Linda immediately. "You need to see this." She sent the screenshot. Linda was silent for a long moment. Then, "Susan, this is more than inappropriate. This is suspicious. Very suspicious." "What do you mean?" Think about it. Margaret dies unexpectedly during a routine surgery. Within weeks, her much younger boyfriend and her estranged daughter are suddenly together romantically. They're spending her money. They're celebrating. They're acting like they won the lottery. You think they had something to do with her death? I don't know, but I think we need to contact the police. Susan hesitated. What if we're wrong? What if this is all just really poor judgment and terrible timing? And what if we're right? What if they killed her, and we say nothing? That night, Susan couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Margaret, sweet, kind Margaret who had overcome so much, who had built such a beautiful life, who deserved to grow old peacefully, surrounded by people who genuinely loved her. Margaret, who instead died alone on an operating table, betrayed by the people closest to her. The next morning, Susan made a decision. She called the police department. She asked to speak to someone about a suspicious death. She was transferred to Detective Maria Santos, a veteran investigator in the homicide division. I want to report concerns about a death that was ruled accidental, Susan said, her voice shaking. I think it might have been murder. Detective Santos listened as Susan laid out everything. Margaret's relationship with David, his much younger age, the quick progression of their relationship, his control over her finances, the sudden death, during cosmetic surgery, that Margaret had been reluctant to get, the immediate coupling of David and Jennifer, the cruise, the spending, the Las Vegas photo. When Susan finished, Detective Santos was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Can you send me that photo? And any other documentation you have?" "Of course. But, do you think I'm crazy? Am I reading too much into this?" "Ma'am, you're not crazy. I've been doing this job for 20 years, and I've learned to trust my gut, and my gut says there's something very wrong here. Thank you for calling. We'll look into this." After hanging up, Detective Santos sat at her desk and stared at the photo Susan had emailed. Two people, dancing, celebrating, living their best life, on money that came from a dead woman who just happened to be the mother of one of them and the girlfriend of the other. She picked up the phone and called her partner, Detective James Rodriguez. "Hey, I need you to pull a file for me. Woman named Margaret Harrison. Died 3 months ago during cosmetic surgery. I want to see the death certificate, the medical examiner's report, everything." "Why? What's up?" "I think we might have a murder disguised as a surgical complication." "Based on what?" "Based on a photo of two people who should be grieving but are instead celebrating in Vegas. Sometimes, Rodriguez, killers are their own worst enemies." Detective Santos didn't waste time. She pulled Margaret's file and started reading. Death certificate listed cause of death as anaphylactic shock due to anesthesia complications. Medical examiner had ruled it accidental. The body had been cremated quickly, at the request of the next of kin. That last part bothered Santos. Quick cremation meant no chance of a second autopsy. No way to verify the cause of death if suspicions arose later. It was convenient. Maybe too convenient. She started digging into David's background, and what she found was damning. David had a criminal record, fraud, identity theft, theft by deception. He had targeted older women before. Never murder, as far as she could tell, but a clear pattern of finding vulnerable, lonely, financially secure older women and draining them dry. She found 3 previous victims in 2 different states. Women who had lost significant amounts of money to David. Women who had filed police reports but hadn't pursued charges because they were embarrassed. Because they felt stupid for falling for his con. Because he had moved on before they could build a case. Santos tracked down one of these women, a 7-1-year-old named Dorothy. "I'm calling about David Reynolds," Santos said. "I believe you had a relationship with him?" Dorothy's voice went cold. "That man is a predator. He stole $40,000 from me, convinced me to invest in a fake business opportunity. By the time I realized it was a scam, he was gone." "Did he ever mention cosmetic surgery to you?" "Constantly. He was obsessed with it, kept telling me I'd look younger, that I should get work done. I refused. I wonder now if I had said yes, would I still be alive?" Santos felt a chill run down her spine. "Thank you, Dorothy. You may have just saved other women's lives by talking to me." "Next." Santos looked into Jennifer. She pulled her criminal record too, some drug possession charges from her 20s, a DUI, nothing violent, but a pattern of poor judgment and impulsive behavior. She was currently unemployed, facing eviction from her apartment when her mother died, deeply in debt. Santos pulled Margaret's financial records. She needed a warrant, but the suspicious circumstances gave her probable cause. What she found was shocking. In the 6 months before Margaret's death, David had slowly drained her accounts. Transfers to his own accounts, cash withdrawals, payments to unknown entities. He had taken nearly $80,000. And then, the life insurance. Margaret had a policy for $300,000. 6 months before her death, the beneficiary had been changed from Jennifer to David. Margaret's signature was on the change form, but Santos had her doubts. The signature looked shaky, uncertain, possibly forged. But the smoking gun came when Santos subpoenaed David's phone records. She found months of calls and texts between David and Jennifer, starting long before Margaret's death. The content of the texts, when she got the warrant to access them, was devastating. "We need to do this soon. I can't keep pretending much longer. The doctor said he can make it look like an accident. No one will suspect. What if she changes her mind about the surgery? She won't. I've got her convinced she needs it, trust me. I can't believe we're really doing this. It's the only way. She's not going to leave you the money while she's alive. She's too controlling. This is our chance." The texts went on and on, months of planning, discussions about the insurance money, even jokes about Margaret's death. It was all there. A complete conspiracy to commit murder, spelled out in black and white. Santos brought the evidence to the district attorney. They sat in a conference room, going through everything. The pattern of David's previous cons, the suspicious death, the quick cremation, the relationship between David and Jennifer, the financial records, the texts, the photos of them celebrating. The DA leaned back in his chair. "This is solid. We can make a case. What about the doctor?" "Working on that now, Dr. Martin. I'm bringing him in for questioning tomorrow." "Think he'll flip?" "If he's got any sense of self-preservation, yes. We've got him on performing surgery with a suspended license. That alone is enough to put him away. If we offer him a deal in exchange for testimony, do it. I want these people in prison." The next day, Detective Santos and Rodriguez showed up at Dr. Martin's clinic. It was closed. A "for lease" sign hung in the window. They tracked him down to a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. When they knocked on his door, "Doctor," Martin answered, looking like he hadn't slept in weeks. His eyes were hollow, his hands shook. He looked like a man being eaten alive by guilt. "Dr. Martin, I'm Detective Santos. We need to talk about Margaret Harrison." All the color drained from his face. He knew why they were there, and he broke immediately. "I want a lawyer," he said, but his voice was weak. "I want a deal." "Sit down," Santos said. They went inside his motel room. It reeked of alcohol and despair. "You're going to tell us everything, and maybe, just maybe, we can help you. But only if you cooperate fully." Dr. Martin sat on the bed, put his head in his hands, and started talking. Dr. Martin confessed everything. He told them about David approaching him, about the $50,000 payment, about how he deliberately administered the lethal dose of anesthesia, about how he watched Margaret die and did nothing to save her, about the nightmares he'd had every night since, about the guilt that was destroying him. "I'm a doctor," he said, tears streaming down his face. "I took an oath to do no harm, and I killed her. I killed an innocent woman for money. I can't live with what I've done. I can't sleep. I can't eat. Every time I close my eyes, I see her face." "Why did you do it?" Santos asked, though she already knew the answer. "I needed the money. I was desperate. My license was suspended. I had debts. I was using again. I thought I could do it and move on, but I can't. I'll never move on from this." "Are you willing to testify against David Reynolds and Jennifer Harrison?" "Yes. God, yes, they should pay for what they did. What we did, we all should pay." With Dr. Martin's confession and agreement to testify, the case was solid. Santos went to the DA's office. They drafted arrest warrants. They assembled a team. And early one morning, they moved in. David and Jennifer were still asleep in Margaret's condo when the police burst through the door, badges flashing, guns drawn, shouting for them to get on the ground. David tried to run out the back door but was tackled immediately. Jennifer screamed, genuinely terrified for the first time since this all began. They were both arrested, read their rights, handcuffed, led out of the building in their pajamas while neighbors watched from their windows. Mrs. Chen, Margaret's neighbor, who had been suspicious from the start, watched them being put into separate police cars. She whispered, "Margaret, they got them. Justice is coming." At the police station, David and Jennifer were separated, put in different interrogation rooms. The detectives used classic tactics, telling each of them that the other was already talking, that they were going to take the fall alone unless they cooperated. Jennifer broke first. She was the weaker link, the one with less experience lying to police. Within 2 hours, she was confessing, telling them about the affair, about the planning, about how David had convinced her that her mother's death was the only way, about the money, about the cruise, about how they had celebrated. "I didn't think it through," she sobbed. "I just wanted the money. I wanted a better life. I didn't think about what I was actually doing, that I was killing my own mother." "Did you love your mother?" Santos asked. Jennifer was quiet for a long time. Then, in a small voice, "I don't know. I think I hated her more than I loved her, for my childhood, for not protecting me better from my father, for not being the mother I needed. But she didn't deserve this. She didn't deserve to die." "No, she didn't," Santos agreed. "She deserved so much better, from everyone, especially from you." In the other room, David was less cooperative. He denied everything at first, said it was all a misunderstanding, that he loved Margaret, that her death was tragic but accidental. But when they told him about Jennifer's confession, about Dr. Martin's testimony, about the texts they had recovered, his facade crumbled. "That stupid girl," he muttered. "I told her to delete everything. I told her to be smart." "So you admit you planned Margaret's murder?" David leaned back in his chair and smiled. Actually smiled. "You already know I did. Jennifer told you. The doctor told you. So what's the point in denying it?" "Why? Why did you kill her?" "Money. Why else? She had it. I wanted it. Simple as that." "Did you ever care about her at all?" David thought about that for a moment. "No, not really. She was a means to an end. They all are. Lonely old women with money and no one to protect them. It's like shooting fish in a barrel." Santos felt disgust rising in her throat. "You're a monster." "No, detective. I'm a businessman. I identify assets and I acquire them. Margaret was an asset, nothing more. She was a person, a human being with feelings and dreams and people who loved her. And now she's dead and I'm rich. Or I would have been, if Jennifer hadn't been so sloppy." The casual way he talked about murder, about Margaret's life, was chilling. This wasn't a crime of passion or desperation. This was calculated, cold-blooded evil. David Reynolds wasn't just a con artist. He was a predator in the truest sense. And he felt no remorse whatsoever. David Reynolds, Jennifer Harrison, and Dr. Martin were all charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. The evidence against them was overwhelming. The texts, the financial records, Dr. Martin's confession, Jennifer's confession, the timeline of events, the witness testimonies. The trial took place 8 months later. It was a media sensation. The story had everything: family betrayal, greed, a murder disguised as a medical accident, a secret affair between a mother's boyfriend and her daughter. The public was horrified and fascinated in equal measure. The prosecution laid out their case methodically. They showed the jury the texts between David and Jennifer. They played recordings of Dr. Martin's confession. They brought in Margaret's friends to testify about David's controlling behavior and his constant pushing for cosmetic surgery. They showed the jury the photos from the cruise in Las Vegas, demonstrating the callous celebration that followed Margaret's death. The defense tried to argue that Margaret's death was accidental, that the relationship between David and Jennifer only began after Margaret died, as a way of coping with shared grief, that the texts were taken out of context. But it was weak, unconvincing. The evidence was too strong. Dr. Martin testified for the prosecution as part of his plea deal. He sat on the stand, looking broken and hollow, and described in clinical detail how he had murdered Margaret. The jury looked sick. Several jurors were crying. One had to leave the courtroom. Jennifer also testified, having accepted a plea deal in exchange for her testimony against David. She was the most damning witness. She described the entire conspiracy from start to finish. The affair, the planning, David's manipulation, her own greed and resentment toward her mother. Her confession was raw, painful, and utterly devastating. "I can never take back what I did," Jennifer said, tears streaming down her face. "I can never bring my mother back. I can never apologize enough. I destroyed the woman who gave me life because I was selfish and weak and stupid. And I will live with that guilt every single day for the rest of my life." The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. They found David Reynolds guilty on all counts: first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, grand theft. The verdict was read, and David showed no emotion, just stared straight ahead, expression blank. Jennifer Harrison, because of her cooperation and testimony, received a lesser sentence. 25 years to life, with possibility of parole after 20 years. Dr. Martin received 15 years for his role in the murder. But David? David received life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge, at sentencing, looked at him with pure contempt. Mr. Reynolds, in my 30 years on the bench, I have never encountered a defendant as cold, as calculating, and as utterly devoid of humanity as you. You targeted a vulnerable woman, manipulated her, isolated her, and ultimately murdered her for financial gain. You enlisted her own daughter in this conspiracy, destroying what remained of their relationship. You corrupted a doctor, turning a healer into a killer. And you did all of this without a shred of remorse. You are a danger to society, and I am ensuring you will never have the opportunity to hurt anyone else ever again. David was led out of the courtroom in shackles. He would spend the rest of his life in a maximum security prison. No more vulnerable women to target, no more cons to run. Just 4 walls and the knowledge that he had thrown away his freedom for money he never got to enjoy. Jennifer, in her statement before sentencing, addressed Margaret's friends who had filled the courtroom. I know nothing I say can make this right. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want you to know that my mother was a good person. She was strong and kind and resilient. She deserved so much better than what I gave her. She deserved a daughter who loved her, who protected her, who honored her, and I failed her in every possible way. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Some of Margaret's friends were crying. Others looked at Jennifer with pure hatred. Mrs. Chen, Margaret's neighbor, stood up and said, "Your mother loved you despite everything. She never stopped hoping you two could have a relationship. She talked about you all the time, always with love, always with hope. And you repaid that love by murdering her. There is no forgiveness for what you've done. I hope you think about her every single day in prison. I hope the guilt destroys you, the way you destroyed her." The courtroom erupted in applause. The judge allowed it for a moment before calling for order. Margaret Harrison's story is a tragedy in every sense of the word. A woman who survived poverty, abuse, and isolation, who rebuilt her life from nothing, who achieved her dreams against all odds, who was kind, generous, and loving, and whose life was ended by the very people who should have protected her. Her death should never have happened. She should be alive right now, enjoying her retirement, reading books, traveling, painting, spending time with friends. She should have grown old peacefully, surrounded by love and respect. Instead, she died alone on an operating table, betrayed by greed and evil. But her story isn't completely without hope, because justice was served. David, Jennifer, and Dr. Martin are all in prison, where they belong. They will spend years, possibly decades, behind bars, paying for what they did. And Margaret's friends, the people who truly loved her, made sure she wasn't forgotten. They established a scholarship in her name for women returning to education later in life. Women like Margaret, who had their dreams delayed but refused to give up. Every year, 5 women receive the Margaret Harrison Scholarship to pursue their degrees. It's a beautiful legacy for a beautiful woman. This case reminds us of several critical things. First, predators don't always look like monsters. They often look charming, attractive, trustworthy. They say all the right things. They know exactly how to manipulate and control. We have to stay vigilant. We have to trust our instincts. And we have to look out for the vulnerable people in our lives. Second, greed can turn people into monsters. Jennifer Harrison wasn't born evil, but her resentment, her financial struggles, her desperation for a better life, it all combined with David's manipulation to turn her into someone capable of matricide, capable of murdering her own mother for money. That should terrify all of us. And third, justice matters. Margaret's friends didn't ignore their suspicions. They spoke up. They called police. They pushed for an investigation. Because of their courage and persistence, Margaret's killers were caught and punished. If they had stayed silent, David and Jennifer would still be free, spending Margaret's money, possibly targeting other victims. So if you see something that doesn't seem right, say something. Don't second-guess yourself. Don't worry about seeming paranoid or judgmental. Better to be wrong and embarrassed than to stay silent and let a killer go free. If this case affected you, if Margaret's story moved you, do me a favor, hit that like button, leave a comment with your thoughts. Share this video, so others can hear Margaret's story and learn from it. And subscribe to Real Crime Stories HQ so you never miss a case. We're building a community here of people who care about justice, who want to understand the darkness so we can fight against it. And remember, these aren't just stories. These are real people, real lives destroyed by violence and greed. Margaret Harrison was real. She mattered. She deserved better. And by remembering her, by sharing her story, we make sure she's never forgotten. Until next time, stay safe out there. Trust your instincts, look out for each other, and never forget that evil can wear a charming smile. This has been Real Crime Stories HQ. I'll see you in the next one.